Ma'am, Rasi sir has joined.
Yes, and Shalini ma'am is just about to join. She says she's clicked on it, so we can start.
I think you can see. Can you see me now?
Yes, Shalini, we can hear you. We can't see you.
Okay. Okay, that's okay then.
Yeah. So I think we can start now.
Okay, ma'am. Priya, Ashu, are we ready?
No, actually the meeting settings are not correct. So Ashu is going to have to do it from OBS. Just give us 1 minute, okay?
All right. Ashu, are you done?
Yeah, ma'am, just done.
All
He's
right.
going to.
Fantastic.
Just give me a clue and I'll start.
Ma'am, we can start.
Okay, great.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Seminar Committee of the Department of History, University of Delhi, welcome you all to the book launch of Locating Pleasure in Indian History, Prescribed and Proscribed Desires in Visual and Literary Cultures, edited by Professor Seema Bawa. Locating Pleasure in Indian History is one of the first works on the subject of the discourse of pleasure in Indian history and culture. A rigorous source-based work, it examines the cultural practices and the underlying philosophic matrix of pleasures, big or small. It recovers the production and consumption of beauty, desire, and gratification in the world of pleasure, pleasurable pursuits, and pleasant experiences of viewing, performing, thinking, debating, cooking, eating, listening, writing, creating, and procreating. It is examined in the urban art of Mathura, Ravan's palace in the art of 7th century CE, Western Deccan, the Surat Khana of Rajput royalty or domestic pleasures of women in the labyrinths of the Puranas. To enlighten us more about it, we have here with us Professor Seema Bawa, the head of the Department of History, University of Delhi, specializing in history of South Asian art and culture. Her areas of research focus on ancient Indian art and iconography, Western Himalayan art and religion, and modern and contemporary Indian art. Books written by her include Gods, Men and Women, Gender Sexuality in Early Indian Art, and Religion and Art of the Chamba Valley, AD 700 to 1300. She was a recipient of Dad Fellowship to read at the University of Bonn. She has lectured extensively in India and abroad on Indian art and architecture iconography, including Institute of Archaeology, the National Museum, India Habitat Center, and more. Her application of academic knowledge in curation of art exhibitions, workshops, art writing for popular and specialized publications, theatre design, and compiling contemporary art history is remarkable. I request Seema Baba ma'am to enlighten us, please.
Hi, thank you for joining us for the launch of this book, which actually has been out for some time. And I'm really looking forward to hearing other people talk about it, because I've lived with this for a very long time, editing it, thinking about it, and then collecting the papers and then editing it and so on and so forth. But the problem with this was that I used to get very engrossed in reading all the material because it was really, really interesting. Every single contribution in this volume has been bring something new to the discourse of pleasure. So that for me was something that I really enjoyed doing. Basically, for me, why I went into doing pleasure at all was because, well, partly I'm looking for beauty in history, looking, as I say, searching for Hoor in history, but also because it's such a pleasure doing what we do, which is to and a joy more than just a pleasure. It's a joy to look at things and find new ways of studying past experiences and emotions. And basically, I was trying to push my own and academic boundaries of the discipline a little bit in my own way. A lot of work has been done in this direction, but one thing that I didn't want it to focus on was on sexual pleasure, because there's a lot of work that's already been done on this. So I didn't want to go into that. And I think that has come across very well in the writings of all the contributors. And I think that's fantastic, because we have poetry and we have a biography of a Jaina merchant, and we have domestic pleasures and courtly pleasures. So that has come across very well, where we are not just talking about a single kind of pleasure. So we are not just talking about somatic pleasures, but we're also talking about intellectual pleasures. And I think that is something that I found very interesting. And this is something I wanted to do also because and I'm sure a lot of my colleagues who will be speaking was because the digital and the new ways of and the informatic technology has changed the way we do history. We practice history, because the semantic web, for example, is something and the ontological and the semantic web and the searches that we can do thereof has made a lot of methodologies of traditional history writing obsolete or redundant, or maybe we need to relook at them. So that is why I thought that maybe something that was talking about, say, history of emotions and history of experiences, however ephemeral those experiences would be, could be something that would give us an opportunity to read sources afresh. The sources, of course, some of them are available to us, but how to look at these in a new way, to look at them through another perspective of trying to recover human experiences. Then, of course, the notion of what is pleasure, whether there is a category of pleasure at all in Indian history, how is this been understood by people who were experiencing it? Sukha, Kama, Bhoga. These are some of the things that I have come across, and I'm sure there must be very many that I am missing. But what I really found very interesting in all the works was that little pleasures in, say, ghee and prescriptions thereof, or in a beryl couch, lying down on a silken couch. These are considered to be pleasures in a cool watermelon. So it's not just that a certain kind of pleasure is being prescribed or proscribed, either which way, depending on who's talking about it. And even what Jaya has talked about in her work, which is that the household and the security and protection and the satisfaction, the marital bliss that it is providing, these are pleasures, gendered pleasures that can emerge from the sources, and they need not be very big. They are I would say it's another perspective about looking at this, and how women look at paintings, in the Surat Khana of the Jaipur court. What is it that women want to look at? Are these pleasures any different? And these are some of the very many questions, like Razi has also talked about this very interesting way in which festivities and the body and somatic pleasures are celebrated. Charlene's work, really, I really enjoyed, because you're looking at both sides of it, prescribed as well as proscribed pleasure. So this is a very complete work as such. And of course, visually, how we can look at courtly pleasures comes through in Parul's work. So I think was very interesting. My work, of course, is limited to Mathura and looking at a few depictions, and trying to see how the Mrichikatikam, the 7 prakoshtas, the 7 courtyards, so the 7 layers of pleasures of a courtesan's house are imagined visually, amongst very many other ways in which they are imagined. But this was something that I found very interesting in that. And I think the whole notion of, somatic, somatophobic, as well as anti-somatic kind of discourses that we come across in sources, some of which are seen in satire, through satire about the hypocrisy of the excesses of the age, whether it is in the Chaturbhani, which or in later Zatalli's poems, or indeed, the pain that, while it is pleasure for some, it need not be uniformly a pleasurable activity for people who are producing this. It's often something that is accompanied by a lot of feeling of exploitation, and a counter discourse to pleasure can also be seen there. So I think I found this project to be very exciting, and I'm just looking forward to everybody else's views on this. So please.
Okay, so I welcome Professor Shalini Shah. Shalini Shah, ma'am, is a professor in the Department of History, University of Delhi. Her areas of research focus on ancient Indian social history and gender studies. She actively devoted herself in the role of research and teaching in St. Stephen's College, Jesus and Mary College, and Indraprasth College for Women of University of Delhi. Her books include नारित्व का गठन, महाभारत में लैंगिक संबंधों की संरचना, महाभारत, a book of codes, teaching history, the making of womanhood, gender relations in the Mahabharata, and many more. I welcome Shalini Shah, ma'am, and please enlighten us more on this.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be part of this seminar review discussion for Professor Baba's edited book, to which many of the contributors are also colleagues. So that is an additional pleasure. Let me start with a discussion on reviewing her book. I am going to be looking at the first 5 contributions in this volume, because my colleague, Professor Charu Gupta, will be looking at the other 5. We just thought that it would make more sense, because we were given 15 minutes. We could do greater justice if we divided the work amongst ourselves. So this is not to say that I wasn't interested in the other 5. It's just that for the purpose of this seminar today, I'll be looking at only the first 5 of the contributions. Now this book, Professor Baba's edited book, Locating Pleasure in Indian History, looks at both, as the title itself tells you, looks at both the normative and the undesirable, though not quote unquote undesired gratification in both literary and visual sources. The various contributions in this edited volume cover the entire chronological span from the from the ancient to early medieval, and then of course to the modern period of Indian history. And as such, it is a very unusual and also a very useful compendium of research articles in an area which is as yet, as you yourself pointed out, which is an area which is as yet largely unexplored. Now, pleasure, as editor says in her introduction, is often limited to an erotic pleasure. But the thrust of this volume is to explore pleasure in its myriad aspects, something which it very successfully does. More importantly, the collected papers in this volume have tried to go beyond the notion of pleasure as the consumption, and this is also something which I thought was a positive take in this book, has tried to go beyond the notion of pleasure as the consumption of mere elite, and then to only male elite. This is to say that, it transcended the usual trap, and this is a trap not so much, I think, of the scholars, but the trap, created more by the sources, and definitely so for the ancient and medieval, where it is much more difficult to come by quote unquote subaltern sources, something which is reasonably more possible for the modern Indian history scholars. So but in spite of that, the fact that this has tried to sort of approach a vision of pleasure which transcends class and which transcends gender, which is of course something which I appreciate very much, is I think a positive take in this book. Now, editor makes a thoughtful observation that there is no uniform discourse on pleasure. There are always counter narrative, she states, and I quote her because I think it sums it up very well, the point, this argument. Pleasure, its production and consumption, its displays are indicators of power and privilege, be it social, political, or religious. Who is allowed to consume, enjoy, and witness pleasure is prescribed, sanctioned, and controlled and regulated. So this, I think, this sort of longish quote sums it up very well. She further sees humor or satire as a powerful tool to overturn, or at least an attempt to subvert the normative regulations in a given culture. Jaya Tyagi's paper focuses on household as the spatial zone where pleasure as sukh is experienced. She also underlines that in the Brahmanical sources, this sukh is inherently gendered, since the sources are androcentric and female voice is non-existent. The notion of how women may relate to pleasure comes through as a second-hand biased version. The author also points to the elitist nature of her sources, which links pleasure with wealth and resources. Another very interesting discussion in Jaya Tyagi's paper is on goddesses as providers of pleasure. She refers to Puranic sources where pleasure is to be gained through the control of power manifested as feminine energy, Shakti. Seema Bawa's comprehensive paper on locating pleasure in the visual culture at Mathura points to the scenes of intimacy, dance, music, feasting, and drinking, which we find depicted in this school of art. In fact, as Bawa notes, there is a sensualization of the visual spaces in the city, which is unparalleled in the history of early Indian art. The historical reason for this lies in the preeminence of Mathura as an Agga Nagara of the early centuries of Christian era, as it was an important city on Uttarapath. Inhabiting this urban space were the Nagarakas, and their leisure activities were the raison d'etre of their pleasured existence. Indic culture has been primarily heterosexual in its ethos, and pleasure scenes from Mathura on the terracotta plaques depict the mixed company. Very obviously, deviant practices do not find much visual representation. However, Bawa does refer to a sculptured Mathura panel which depicts 5 female figures feasting, drinking, and sharing intimate moments where one woman is depicted embracing another right in front of her. And she refers to this particular sculptured panel. And this woman is also drinking. So I found the two things together very interesting in this, the visual, this thing which she has quoted in front of her, and this woman is also drinking. This depiction can be subjected to some interesting interpretations. Although Bawa hasn't done so, but I think this is a very interesting example which she can take further. This is subsequent to some interesting interpretations. Bawa's paper also clears one misconception perpetuated by the Dharma Shastras that proscribed alcohol consumptions, particularly by women. So that also I found, this visual attestation to that, something which contradicts what is presented as a normative behavior of women in the Dharma Shastras, interesting in her paper. Now, Ashish Ebrol and Jenica Paul's joint paper looks at a specific genre of Sanskrit texts, which is the one-act play known as the Bhanas. These are one-act plays, and they are in the history of Sanskrit literature, they are referred to as the Bhanas. These Bhanas were satires which subverted prescribed social norms. No wonder then that they were peopled by marginals of the society, cheats, vaishyas, gossiping underclass, and so on. In terms of themes, Bhanas stand out as a genre of text which privilege pleasure and take a particular delight in subverting subverting desired social behavior. So they take a particular delight in subverting desired social behavior. This is something which stands out about the Bhanas as a genre of text. Now, Ebrol and Paul, in their microscopic study of the primary sources, note many instances of sheer enjoyment, merriment, and joie de vivre of the many characters in the plays. Parul Pandyadhar's scholarly paper juxtaposes two sets of sources: Ramayan's Sundarkand with the early medieval Indian sculptural representation in Western Deccan. As an art historian, she has made a case study of the Chalukyan temple art at two very important sites of the Chalukyan temples, which is Aihole and Pattadakal. It is her considered opinion that visual depiction of Ravan's Lanka rarely, if ever, paralleled the heavenly and courtly pleasures as depicted in Sundarkand. Elaborating on this disjunction, Dhar notes that this could be because what is effective in poetry may not be suited to the visual medium. As an example, Dhar points to the Auchitya theory of the Sanskrit poetics. While the theoretical norms, as outlined in the Auchitya theory, required that any excesses, whether of anger or eroticism, be eschewed, the numerous sensual portrayals of the female form and their frank sexuality leads to the surmise that, that proscribed behavior, as the Auchitya theory, she tells us, as the proscribed behavior laid down in this theory were not rigorously imposed on the visual art, which, as Dhar very pertinently and perceptively points out, is more visceral and tangible than philosophical. Shaleen Jain's paper seamlessly weaves the narrative on prescribed and proscribed pleasures in his study of a Jain merchant, Banarsi Das's autobiography, the famous Ardha Kathanak, written in the 17th century. Shaleen Jain's discussion on pleasure that individual derives from his various relationships, familial as well as non-familial, particularly the relationship with friends, is particularly appealing. Ardha Kathanak is an autobiography of a merchant. So it is interesting to note how friendship is understood by Banarsi Das as a relationship which develops and it endures on the basis of pleasure of financial reward. And this is something I found particularly interesting because the usual understanding of friendship is something which is a complete relationship is in itself. And in order to be a relationship, to be a true relationship with the friend, the financial reward are not to be, counted in it. So that is why, I found that interesting, the fact that he has picked up on this very unusual description of friendship, and probably it suits the fact that Banarsi Das is a merchant and he's talking about this friendship where the pleasure of financial reward is very much interwoven into a friendly relationship. In fact, Banarsi Das refers to friendship between his father and another Bania, Karamchand Mahur, where latter generously helped the former in his days of hardship. And in Banarsi Das' own friendship with Narottam Das, the shared business interests were an important, if not the only aspect of their relationship. So this is something that I found very interesting. I compliment the editor, Professor Bava, in putting together a very interesting volume. It is very obviously a labor of love in which much pleasure has been taken. But to the publisher, Bloomsbury, I have a complaint. Why did they give such a dull and drab jacket cover to a book which is celebratory in its theme? The beautiful red sandstone of the Mathura sculptured panel simply sank without trace in this cover. I do hope that publisher is more mindful in future about the wrapping of the manuscript as they are about the copy editing. But I enjoyed going through this book. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I welcome Professor Charu Gupta. She is a professor of Modern India in Department of History, University of Delhi. Her work focuses on gender, sexuality, masculinity, caste, religious identities, and vernacular literatures in early 20th century Northern India. Her books include Sexuality, Obscenity, Community, Women Muslims and the Hindu Public in Colonial India, The Gender of Caste, Representing Dalits in Print, Caste and Life Narratives, and many more. She has been a visiting professor and ICCR chair at the University of Vienna, a visiting faculty at the Yale University, the Washington University, and the Ram Bottomwool Distinguished Scholar at the University of Hawaii. She serves on the editorial board of various journals as well. I welcome you, ma'am.
Okay, thanks so much for that introduction, Soumya, and thanks, Shalini, for such a thorough description of the first 5 chapters, and also for your comments on the introduction. And foremost, congratulations to Seema Bawa for bringing together writing, selecting, and transmitting an archive of pleasure to us readers. What is perhaps a critical contribution of this collection is that it shows us how pleasure is constituted in various historical periods, geographical sites, religious texts, print and visual cultures, and how it exists across arenas encompassing elite and popular, subjects and objects, human and non-human, women and men, literature and poetry, erotic art and architecture, food and fantasy, caste and class, sex and love. Experiences and acts of pleasure engage with the body, the heart, and the mind. So in Foucault's order of things, the twin cycles of pleasure and prohibition mutually constitute each other, and this book too shows us that prescribed and proscribed often go together. Yet, what historically has been significant about pleasure is that it prolifically lends itself to subversion and transgression, playing with regulatory discourses of religion on the one hand and science on the other, as various essays in this collection point out. The introduction and the essays show that an Indian history of pleasure spreads out widely and unevenly. It escapes systematization. An Indian history of pleasure also makes us reflect on the anecdotal, the mundane, and the everyday, thus expanding our archival arenas, which usually often record the painful, the tragic, and the cataclysmic. For narratives of pleasure, the quotidian becomes imperative methodologically, as it is in the narratives of everyday life that pleasure is ubiquitous. The collection tells us that archival traces of pleasure come from other places and sources. A robust archive of pleasure narrates to us a tale of hidden treasures of research. What is equally important about the essays here is that they underscore how a history of pleasure in India dips into traditions of both ecstatic sensuality and stern asceticism, bhogi and yogi, sensual and intellectual, an embrace and a shunning of sexuality. Together, the essays take us through pleasures of beauty, laughter, satire, food, music, sense, poetry, literature, sculpture, and art. And as Bawa states, they attempt to recover the pleasures of self, soul, and sociality. So love, passion, desire, and expressions of sexuality are quintessential markers of pleasure. And of course, because my work is on sexuality, I keep coming back to this again and again in my comments. So as Madhvi Menon shows through various examples, sexual pleasure extended across what we now term hetero and homosexuality, both of which happily coexisted along polyamory and celibacy. Mir Taqi Mir thus stated, "If not him, there is his brother. Mir, are there any restrictions in love?" Or Vatsan's statement in Kama Sutra that passion knows no order. The word Kam encompasses sex, pleasure, desire, and erotic love. Kalidas's celebrated epic Kumar Sambhav devotes an entire canto of 91 verses to detailed descriptions of Uma's erotic pleasures with Shiva. There are sculptures of anal sex, threesomes, and orgies on the wall of Khajuraho and other temples. Moreover, the present book shows that pleasure is definitely not a means to reproduction or procreation. Many of the ancient Hindu and medieval Islamic texts extol the pleasures of non-reproductive sex. And since my colleague and friend Shalini has commented on the first 5 chapters quite extensively, I'm going to say something briefly on the last 5 ones. Though I've read all of them, and I must say I really enjoyed all of them, but I thought that Shalini was much more competent to do much more justice to those dealing with the earlier period. So let me start with the essays of my colleagues and friends, Saifuddin Ahmad and Raziuddin Akil, which are mutually complementary and take us through the enchanting world of Urdu poetry from 17th to 19th centuries in North India through the delightful figures of Mir Muhammad Jafar Zatali and Nazir Akbarabadi, respectively, where one displays a world of displeasure and adversity, while the other celebrates everyday pleasures of festivals, food, and fun. In a milieu of political turmoil and social instability of 17th and early 18th century North India, Saifuddin Ahmad brings to us a counter discourse of pleasure in the works of Zatali, who powerfully used savage satire and ribald humor to craft acerbic criticism of shallowness and moral corruption of society. A master of invective satires, Zatali was, as Ahmad shows, the first major Urdu poet of North India who had been largely marginalized and ignored in literary history, as he has been regarded as nonsensical and obscene. Ahmad also gives various examples of how Zatali's savage and obscene satire was often directed against women of the high class who were portrayed as sexually promiscuous, whores, and cheats. The essay opens for us a world of wit and counter-hegemony. While extremely rich, I was wondering why the word pleasure or even pain and counter-pleasure does not feature at all in the essay. It will be great to underline the contribution of this essay to theoretical discourses on pleasure. Moving on to the extremely pleasurable essay of Raziuddin Akil, Nazir Akbarabadi's celebration of little pleasures of life, fairs, festivals, changing seasons, mangoes, dalliances with women and weddings, provides us a window not only into varied possibilities of fun, but also opens for us a theater of the local and vernacular possibilities amidst the elitist, dry world of adab and sharafat. The streets, the marketplace, the fair, and above all, people of all hues and religions are the playground of Akbarabadi. His rejoicing of festivals, including Holi and Diwali, do not only enrich our understandings of syncretism and shared spaces in cultural and literary histories of India, they also emphasize the importance of studying the local and the anecdotal. Akil challenges histories of decay by bringing out the richness and cultural efflorescence of 18th and 19th century Urdu writing. The gourmet delights of mangoes can take us further into new histories of food and desire. The sexual pleasures of Akbarabadi's poetry, as Akil shows, while deeply embarrassing for the prudish and conservative elites, offer a compelling vernacular of dissent against the flawed normativities of the time. I just have a minor critique, which is that I wish Akil had offered us translations of the extensive and captivating poetry narrated in this delectable essay. While Akil takes us to the life on the streets and bazaars, Preeti Sharma's essay moves to the elite women's quarters of Rajput queens, the Zenani Dori of the Jaipur court, and the landscape of art paintings patronized by them. Sharma contends that these conveyed moments of tenderness, which integrated visual renderings of the patrons' male relatives with illustrated textual types of romantic Shringar paintings, thereby subverting patriarchal norms. Examining the Rajput queens, Sharma juxtaposes the patriarchal domination and conformism of the public sphere to pleasures of the domestic and private Zanana space through art patronage. The essay includes some enthralling paintings patronized particularly by the Rajput queens. I enjoyed the essay. At the same time, when examining these paintings of pleasure and their gendered readings, we can perhaps further rethink, expand, and problematize the theoretical paradigm applied by Sharma of a dual hermeneutics and dichotomy of subjugation to domination in public and radical resistance in private, and of queens as objects of pleasure in public and subjects of pleasure in private, as these are messy domains that constantly impinge on and puncture each other. Let me move to the essay of my colleague, friend Santosh Kumar Rai. Rai observes that in the context of colonial modernity, the pleasure of fashion and wearing clothes on the one hand, and the material culture of creativity and sorrow of production of the handloom weavers on the other are intricately woven together. Bringing together cultural and material histories of pleasure and pain through clothing, Rai underlines the negotiations and tensions between modern trends of fashion and existing structures of handloom production amidst a colonial regime. Through rich data and records, Rai shows how the influx of English mill made cloth and rise of middlemen adversely affected these adversely affected the livelihoods of subaltern weavers, driving many to agriculture and other trades, with some revival in the aftermath of the First World War due to decline in imports. Some specialized silk cloth producers, master weavers, and mediators, the grihastas, these prospered due to elite demands of expensive silk. Rai skillfully brings out that fashion, like pleasure, is socially constructed and constantly shaped by taste, changing consumer preferences, imagination, and acceptability. At the same time, pleasure, like fashion and clothing, also has a caste, class, and religion. And it will be fascinating to read a little more on these connections, which I know Rai does in his book much more extensively. Finally, shifting from the material world of Rai, Kota Nilima's paper takes us into the realm of the spiritual and the devotional. Describing the depths of pleasure of the devotee in performing rituals, Nilima argues that the intensity of devotion in Indian traditions marks a subtle rebellion. Not bound by external symbols, scripted rules, places of worship or religion, Devotional pleasure moves in the space of internal spirituality and, according to Nilima, is subversive and defiant. The discontent of devotion defies all regulation as it rests on pleasure of togetherness with God through an internal world and accessible and simple activities. The rebellion of devotion makes all external obedience to religion possible and at the same time redundant. While an interesting argument, I'm thinking of Dalit and feminist critiques of certain rituals of devotion and rituals of austerity. Does the optics of devotional faith and devotional performance have any broader cultural and political implications, as well as certain exclusions? Altogether a rich collection, my small quibble with it is that I would have loved to know more about the shifts that occurred over time and space in narratives and experiences of pleasure. As a historian of modern India, who has done some work on questions of sexuality, obscenity, and pleasure, I can think of some significant displacements and new emergences with the coming of colonialism and modernity in histories of pleasure. Riding on the wave of an overwhelming ideal of puritanical Victorian morality and chastity, the everyday pleasures and enjoyments of the colonized, festival of Holi, singing of marriage songs, courtesans, watching Nautanki, poetic descriptions of the female body, erotic representations of non-normative sexualities, and fairs came to be increasingly depicted by the Britishers and a section of Indian elites as breeding grounds for a spectrum of imagined vices and the loci of intemperance and decadence, which were used in the rhetoric of an evangelical civilizing mission on the one hand, and the serious business of nationalism on the other. Moreover, there was a major shift from the uncoupling of pleasure and procreation, as there was a growing fear of bodily pleasures, and sex came to be linked much more explicitly with reproduction. Thus, with modernity and colonialism, the disciplining of pleasure got much more institutionalized. And yet, going beyond Foucauldian paradigms, modernity brought its own material sexual pleasures and popular mass entertainment. The intersections between everyday life, sex, sociality, and colonial power also show us that while control over pleasure was brought under increasing prominence, there were a rich variety of practices and complexities of literary, visual, and cultural imaginations that were also placing limits upon prescriptions of pleasure. For example, as shows Anjali Arondikar, it was noted in a 19th century sex manual meant largely for women that the new India rubber dildo was much better than early dildos made of ivory and silver, as it provided women with an uncannily real pleasure. A history of dildo shows how its modern avatars exceed normative visual registers, as its semblance to a penis lies not in that it looked like a prick, but in that it felt like one, and fitted into the texture of a porn narrative of female seat of pleasure. Or noted Ugra in his popular story collection Chocolate that gardens, jails, colleges, and libraries were the new modern sites of homosexual pleasure, absorbing elements of public parade and private desire, hurried encounter, and lengthy leisure. The overwhelming argument made by a section of historians about the triumph of sexual conservatism and a grim morality in modern India thus needs to be qualified. The enhanced circulation of print and the vernacular also led in many ways to a democratization of pleasure. For example, combining erotica, classics, and science, at least 30 books were published in Hindi in early 20th century that contained words like Kam Shastra, Kok Shastra, Riti Shastra, and Rati Kriya. The the vernacular opened up a plural and heterogeneous world of epistemic possibilities of pleasure, incorporating Sanskrit and Persian, but also going beyond them. In spite of wavering patronage and censorship, such publications thrived and were sustained by market forces. These at times colluded and others defied the imperium of normative pleasures. The print and the visual, as this book testifies, created spatial intimate spaces which opened ancillary textures that precluded the crafting of any master narrative of pleasure. The Savita Bhabi comic strip, our dildos, cinema and theater, sessions of gossip and laughter, the delights of Lahori kebabs and golgappas on the street, and the hidden archives of desire continue to enrich our everyday histories of pleasure. The terrain of pleasure is messy, disorderly, and capacious, and in many ways implicitly opposite to a singular monolithic imagery of India. I once again applaud Seema Bawa for putting together this pleasurable volume. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now I welcome Professor Farhat Nasreen. Farhat Nasreen ma'am taught in the Army Cadet College, IMA, Dehradun, before joining Jamia Millia Islamia in 1999. She is a professor in the Department of History and Culture, JMI. She has published 6 books entitled Kashful Bagawat, Gorakhpur, a rare eyewitness account of the revolt of 1857, Biodiversity and Indian Culture, Khuluq Azim, Sublime Morals, Religious Fads of Medieval Braj, If History Has Taught Us Anything, and The Great Mughals. Her latest book presents an engrossing saga of one of the greatest dynasties of the world, the Sultanate Mughaliya. Professor Nasreen has delivered over 130 talks in various academic institutions. I welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Soumya. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So first, I congratulate Professor Seema Bawa for this amazing book, because like I wrote to her that it was a pleasure actually going through it. And it's a very difficult subject to deal with, because it's both difficult and easy at the same time. It's abstract and it is also concrete, because you are looking at you're trying to figure out the abstract through the concrete. So that is one thing which was difficult to do. And then there can be a lot of variation in how people understand pleasure. So it's very difficult to catch on to the correct strain, and and to see that particular strain is repeating itself. So I think it was a very tough thing to to bring together the kind of collection that she has managed to bring through. I'll quickly talk about the papers, whatever I observed, very quickly, because a lot has already been said. So Jaya Tyagi, of course, looks at the household as a domain of both pleasure and pain. So there is actually a paradox there. And also that when you have the Buddhist texts coming in, then there is an emphasis that actually the household is a place where there is a lot of pain. The pain is much more than the pleasure. That is why it is always a good idea for women to shift to the Sangh and join the Sangh. And then there are problems related to the joining of the Sangh. So there are issues like that which she talks about. Then Seema, she cites, Desmond, The Pleasure Is Mine, which I thought was a very, very apt, very, very apt thing to cite here, and the discourse that follows therein. So she talks a lot about, in context of Mathura region. She would talk about Preeti and Rati and, the Kamdev, and of course, all the artifacts which are there in the Mathura Museum. Amongst that, the pillar of pleasure was really very, very fascinating. And within that, Seema's comment that she's written for her readers that the sculptor has also tried to capture the smile of the women to show that how happy they are. So one thing is that and then I went back to that figure and I tried to see where is the smile, and yeah, it was right there. And I thought that Not only that, that the sculptor was so particular about it, but then there is somebody after, you know, hundreds of years who's noticed that smile, and she's telling other people about that particular smile, which rests there. Then the idea of shared pleasure, again in Seema's article, the act of the pleasure of beautifying oneself. Again, it's a repeated theme in the visuals that she has used, and the visual and catching on to the visual representation of pleasure. All that was very, very interesting. Then the tensions between pleasure and aestheticism, something that she also referred to in her introduction when she has cited a song there, Jogi Tum Jao Re. That was something which was reflected in Article 2. Then we have Ashish and Paul. Interestingly, there's one little thing that they cite. They say that the wicked king's passion, you know, they shift the responsibility of their own passions. A wicked king would shift the responsibility of his own passions on some minister. And a loose woman would shift the responsibility perhaps on her mother. It is something like that. So, you know, having certain desires, but not taking the responsibility for those desires, but, you know, blaming somebody else for them was, I think, a very interesting point that they made out there. Shaleen Jain, the pleasant and the unpleasant moments, of course, spoke about, you know, sometimes the conflict between personal pleasure and the social, you know, the social restrictions over that kind of a pleasure. That was one thing. And the other was, you know, that looking for pleasure in various relationships. So looking for pleasure in your relationship with your parents and your friend and your spouse, and maybe, you know, the other love interests that you could have. So there is a variety of the kinds of pleasure that one can explore, is what Banarsi Das is talking about, directly or indirectly. That is something that Shaleen has presented very well and in a very subtle way. Loved it, absolutely. Then Raziuddin has drawn attention to the sensibility of the Urdu poets for little pleasures in life. Like, you know, someone just said a while ago about festivals and happiness. And then he cites a particular sher out here, which says that Chand tasveere buta chand hasino ke khutut, baad marne ke mere ghar se ye sama nikla. So when I died, there were just some old photographs and some letters of some, you know, women, some beautiful women, or maybe some earlier beloveds. That is all the possession and all the treasure that I had. Those were the things that I was holding on to. Which brings us to the question, is that you cannot define that what thing is going to bring pleasure to whom. And it also brings into focus the question that, can money always buy pleasure? Can money always buy happiness? Can money buy you things that you value? And you know the answer. So I don't need to get into the answer. Then, of course, there is another poem that he cited here, which was the Lutf-e Shabab, which I found very, very interesting. So it went like this, ki is dhab ke maze rakhti hai aur dhang jawani, ishko dikhlati hai ajab rang jawani, आशिक को तो अल्लाह ना दिखलाए बुढ़ापा. In fact, this was a part of the title also, कि आशिक को तो अल्लाह ना दिखाए बुढ़ापा. Now, when I think of pleasure in today's day and time, and the pleasure that people take in looking young, because we are living in a day and time where we are absolutely obsessed with youth. No one is ready to, become old, because becoming old is something, which is almost unacceptable. And the $1 trillion industry, which is going into, looking young, and they promise you youth, is doing great business. It's all about this pleasure, and that Allah na dikhaye ashik ko budhapa. In our times, I mean, Allah na dikhaye ashik ko, mashook ko, uske maa ko, baap ko, nana, dada, kisi ko bhi budhapa na dikhaye, because budhapa is completely unacceptable. So then again comes the question, like there was a recent, ad which is going on for the Kama hair dye, in which you have one of the heroines who says that I have decided that I'm going to dye my hair when I feel like dyeing, otherwise I will not dye it. That there enters the choice. There enters the choice of deciding that what is pleasure for you. not letting the society tell you that this is pleasurable and therefore you should do this. So walking away from those pre-decided notions of pleasure, that is something which is very, very important here. Then, of course, there is a lot of philosophy in the poems which both Razi and Saif has also dealt with. In fact, Saifuddin, when he talks about the poems that he has selected, there came out a pleasure in making fun of people, the fun of making fun of others, and also the fun in respecting others. So that again was a very interesting thing, which also brings us to this, that our choices of what pleases us at any given point in time or in the context of a particular space also keeps shifting. It is not something which is immobile. So, our own notions also keep shifting. Just like, earlier it was said that the notions of pleasure have changed from time to time. Our personal notions of pleasure also keep changing from time to time. Now, a general overview of what I could, see in this text. Firstly, the book itself is born of, the philosophy of pleasure from Seema's mom. She mentions that, it is her mother who inspired her to bring this book together, because she told them that you have to take, pleasure in small things, which Seema has not written, but I understand that her mom would have something to do with gratefulness, because it is gratefulness in here and now, in what you have, whether big or small, and you have to be happy about it and you have to celebrate that. That is the real kunji to pleasure. So it is Seema's mom's ideology, which really, puts in the kunji to the unlocking of this book about pleasure that she endeavored to bring together. Many congratulations. Then the other thing is that in the earlier generation, one found that people were not, they were not trained to be in a constant state of competition. Something that now our generation, especially the younger one, we are training our younger generation also to be in a constant state of competition with others. And in case if you decide that you are not going to compete with others, then people will come and tell you कि तुम्हें अपने आप से compete करना है. हर वक्त compete करना ही क्यों है? Why can't we just sit back and relax and enjoy something that we are doing? Why do we have to compete either with other people, our colleagues and friends? अगर उनसे compete नहीं कर रहे हैं तो अपने आप से compete कर रहे हैं कि ये यहाँ तक पहुंच गया, अब इससे ऊपर और पहुंचना है. क्यों हर वक्त पहुंचना है? Why don't we just sit back and enjoy and let things take their own course? That is something that I thought that at the philosophical level, the book was talking about. Then the other thing is the choice between pleasing yourself and pleasing others, a question that came repeatedly wherever women were discussed. So often, you are told that pleasure lies in pleasing others. But then where is that balance? You have to look for that balance, between pleasing yourself and pleasing others, because it's a fine balance. If you get it wrong, then you're going to become simply, selfish and completely self-centered. So it is a fine balance, but where is that balance? Because sometimes when you're too selfish and too self-centered, eventually after years, you may just regret it. So maybe something which you found great pleasure in at some point in time may become a cause of regret later on. That philosophy, also the papers in generally, they explored, because this is the overview of the book that I am now talking about. Then the idea, of course, that pleasure may mean different things to different people. So maybe to the ascetic, being an ascetic is something that pleases him or her. And maybe for the householder, it pleases that. Maybe, maybe a prostitute is happy the way she is. And then there was this absolutely beautiful thing, which was about Charu Dutt and, the heroine, what I'm forgetting her name, of Richka Tikam. What was the name?
वसंत सेना.
वसंत सेना. तो वसंत सेना और चारू दत्त दोनों के बारे में सीमा ने लिखा है कि वो अपना पूजा पाठ रोज करते थे ठीक से. I mean, so they would be, like very particular about the rituals, but otherwise they would do whatever they were doing. So Charu Dutt is having an affair, and Vasant Sena is, she's anyways a prostitute, of course a high-end prostitute. So this brought me to the 6 cups principle, कि अगर आपके घर में एक चाय की प्याली टूट गई तो वो बाकी जो 5 बची है वो भी थोड़ी फोड़ देंगे कोई ले जाके. सो देयरफॉर ठीक है भाई, थोड़ा सा टाइम आप अपने पूजा पाठ को आपने डिवोट करा, बाकी में यू गो एंड यू हैव योर fun, so you are saving the other 5 cups at least. And it can work vice versa also. तो हो सकता है कि 5 हिस्से में आप पूजा पाठ और इबादत कर रहे हो और 1 हिस्से में you have fun. So the 6 cups principle, I thought it was working there. Then the price of pleasure. Sometimes something that you think that is giving you a lot of pleasure at one point in time, but it has a price. Sometimes the price is very big, sometimes it's it's okay, it's payable. So that is again something that we need to look at. In delinking pleasure from wealth, that is something that underlines the whole discourse, that we need to delink wealth with pleasure beyond a point. I mean, beyond, maybe you can strive for having the basic security, safety, a basic level of comfort, but beyond that we need to delink pleasure from wealth. There was another mention of bhukti and mukti. So bhukti is domination, mukti being liberated. Now this mukti may sometimes also mean the mukti from your own endless desires. So it is also that mukti that we need to think of. And then we have to kind of position ourselves in such a way that we enjoy the here and now. We never let go of small things that make us happy. We kind of don't postpone happiness, don't postpone celebrations. I think all those things were very, very important. Now, I would just like to end with a little song, because Seema has also used a couple of songs. So I thought I can take the liberty for this. Now, there was a song which was written by Yogesh Gaur in 1974 for a movie called Rajnigandha, produced by Basu Chatterjee. The tune was set by Salil Chaudhary, and Mukesh had sung this song. This was in 1974, and it went like this. कई बार यूं भी देखा है ये जो मन की सीमा रेखा है, मन तोड़ने लगता है अनजानी आस के पीछे, अनजानी प्यास के पीछे मन दौड़ने लगता है. So it is pleasure, ख्वाहिशें. एक और एक 2 लाइनें which says कि तमन्नाओं के बहलावे में अक्सर आ ही जाते हैं. So इतना खिंचाव है इसमें, तो इसका जो खिंचाव है और जो बाकी considerations हैं उनके बीच का जो balance है, that is something that we need to locate. और आपको ये भी जाते जाते बता दूं कि मुकेश को ये गाना इतना पसंद आया कि उसके बाद 1976 में जब दोबारा बासु चैटर्जी की मूवी के लिए उनको गाना गाना था, so he didn't take any money for that. And the song कई बार यूं भी देखा है, ये जो मन की सीमा रेखा है, it's an award-winning song in the National Awards for the best lyrics. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was like a cherry on top. Okay, so I thank all the professors for a detailed review and thoughtful remarks on the book. The room is now open to questions or comments. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. So
Okay, ma'am.
if there are no questions, I think everybody is very tired by now. We can thank everybody. In case you have any questions, of course, the most of the contributors are here, and and they'll be happy to answer, I'm sure, any questions that you may have about their individual contributions or the book on the whole. Because in case you haven't read the books and you have any queries about any, or you have a comment.
Anyone can just put on their audios or videos on and just talk directly.
I just thought I'll thank the discussants for engaging with the book so deeply. And in fact, there was so much pleasure in the discussions that they did. So thank you for that. It was really, I could see that, some of the discussions were really coming from the heart, and that's really nice of them to have discussed it in this way and read the book so thoroughly and gone through all the papers in that manner. So I just wanted to thank them for that.
Thanks.
Yes, of course, and that's been fantastic. And some of the suggestions that you've made, which of course the book has not covered, are very, very important because, for example, modernity and colonial modernity and thereafter are things that I was not able to really cover in this book because it's getting too big and too unwieldy. And things that Charu has also talked about are very valuable, contributions to the entire, colonial marginalization of pleasure. And I think that's something that I wasn't able to at all bring to the forth. And the democratization of pleasure is another aspect, just like the democratization of religion, and how that plays upon our consciousness and how we perceive certain categories is again a very, very important suggestion, as is Shalini's comments on the design for one, and also things. So I'm really grateful for those, because not only does it show your engagement with the subject, and of course I know that all three of you have in various ways been working on these aspects. So having comments from you on this was very important, and I personally am very thankful. And anybody else who wants to say anything, please.
Ma'am, there's a question from Facebook. Mohit Yadav wants to ask, can anyone get the pleasure of one's choice in the present times, especially in terms of caste and class arena?
Who wants to take that question? Charu, because you work on caste and class and modernity, would you like to answer that?
So Mohit, I would just respond to this by saying that pleasure does have a caste, it has a gender, it has a class. So of course, while as Professor Farhat Nasreen beautifully said, there is no direct relationship between pleasure and wealth, but you do see how pain is intrinsically tied, or displeasure is intrinsically tied to questions of caste and class. So I do think that when one, and especially the arena in the present times, when we are seeing these COVID times, which have in many ways brought us on the same page, where everyone is suffering. Where there has been a kind of, how should I say, a homogenization of pain. But I do think that questions.
Thank you, Charu. I would just like to say that in fact,
clearly
may I?
Anybody else can respond. Yeah.
Yeah. Just adding to Charu, what she said, I think that today modernity per se is becoming very regressive term, at least in society like ours. And here, when we are talking about both caste and class, as Mohit recommended, or Shivangani has just made an observation. Today we have to say that pleasure or displeasure is by choice. Today in 21st century, when politics is under turmoil across the globe, when identities are constantly shifting and identities are being imposed from Abbajan, okay, to Afghanistan's gendered politics, we require to remember that here choices for pleasure are getting narrowed down. And here, I'm thankful to all the three discussants and Professor Seema Bawa for enabling us to have this great discussion. And I just want to say these are the very tough times to have real pleasure. Yet we had this pleasure for almost 1 hour. Thank you very much.
Great one, Santosh.
Okay,
Yeah.
ma'am. There's a comment by Shivangini Kumari in the chat box. If Shivangini wants to say that herself, please unmute.
Actually, I'm traveling and my network will get
Okay.
disturbed. That's why I have messaged here.
No issues. I'll just read it what she said. She said she could not read the whole, but some chapters. It was interesting and thought-provoking that brings many different areas in one book. Expansion of concepts like pleasure in this world of unsettling identity crisis is worth of attention and crucial. Thank you for bringing out such under-discussed topic in mainstream. Looking forward to complete it.
So I think
Yes, ma'am.
yes,
So
that is it. We can wrap up, and you can also announce next week's lecture.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Ma'am, I do have a question.
Yes.
First of all, I would like to congratulate you for giving us such a such an enlightenment regarding the issues related to the consciousness of pleasure. But the question is related to the whole context that we are talking all about. It is related to consciousness of pleasure associated with the community who are coming from the place, who are there in power and positions. And why? Because almost all the sources which has been referred, it should be, it were somewhere associated with the elite family, those who were directly engaged with reading, writing, or from where these sources were being composed. My question is all about what about the space regarding the consciousness of pleasure regarding the subaltern section of the society, or those who were at the marginalized level of the society, and how they were associated. How can we generalize or create a concept how they were attaining, or how the sense of their consciousness regarding the pleasures can be understood?
Well, as far as sources are concerned, we've tried, almost everybody has tried to look at least some level of non-elite pleasures, So whether it is Professor Akhil's essay, where he's looking at ordinary people in the streets, in the bazaars, and how they are enjoying pleasures of eating a mango, for example. Now, this is not necessarily something that can be considered to be confined to the elite, right? So, or about a vegetable seller, or a person on, similarly, Professor Tyagi is also looking at women in the household. The text may be talking about that obliquely. So what is happening here is that you're trying to read silences and absences in literature and visual culture, and trying to see where can you place these, or where can you locate pleasure in these silences and absences. And I think that that's something that we've tried to do in very many essays. And in fact, a wonderful essay is Professor Rai's in this, where, the fact that the Julahas and the weavers are adapting and trying to work around the changing fashions of colonial modernity. And yet you can see how there are moments where you can see these kind of moments of pleasure. Similarly with Banarsi Das, even the act of being robbed, who's robbing whom, what is happening, those kind, and friendship, which is a very fraternal kind of emotional pleasure that he's gaining. He's not necessarily belonging to the ruling class. So I think there are places in which we are finding these kind of subversions to the notion of elite pleasures, and I think that's something that that's exactly where we are going to find a discourse of pleasure. Otherwise it's a very conventionalized discourse. When we talk about the elite, the courtly pleasures, masculinity, is very much part of constructing that kind of a discourse of elite, masculine, patriarchal kind of pleasure. But when you start looking beyond that, that is where you find Quotidian pleasures are things that can actually give you a window into the kind of emotions or experiences which are talking about non-elite people. I hope.
So when just
Thank you, ma'am.
to sort
Yeah.
of respond very briefly to this,
Yeah.
because even if we are looking at elite sources, we are also looking at pleasure from different dimensions. So we are looking at the whole process of providing pleasure. So who are the providers of pleasure? And how pleasure, if you're envisaging or constructing a notion of pleasure in a text, then how pain is also being seen as an alternative form. So, you can't discuss pleasure and not discuss pain, because somebody's pleasure could be at the expense of somebody else, and it could be somebody's pain. So that is also something that has been explored in this text. So I just wanted to point that out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Azad.
Seema, can I add something to this?
Yes, of course.
Thank you, ma'am. I got it.
What I felt was that the book was running at two planes, actually. One was the plane where you were talking about the concretes, but there is also a lot of philosophy of pleasure that this text deals with. In fact, all the authors, when they present a fact in concrete, where you're talking about maybe numbers, where texts are being cited, but each one of them has a philosophy to talk about soon after that text or whatever they are citing there. So I think that the book itself is operating at two levels. So that is what I wanted to add.
Thank you.
Ma'am, there's another
Okay.
question. While talking about pleasure in particular space and time, deconstruction of that period's pleasure, our notion of pleasure gets dominant over that. How will historian overcome from that? What type of practices are being used by historians?
If I understand the question correctly, what you want to say is how any reading of any of our readings would be anachronistic, because we will have our own particular perspective, which may be, to reading a source which is far away in terms of time from us. Is that what you're asking? Because if you're asking that, then
this is a question by Kera Ram.
Kera, would you like to, is this what you want to know? That how historian looks at a source, which is, whether it is for pleasure or for any other thing, that is true, that the source is always something that you need to use certain methods of studying sources. And I'm sure every...
Can I say something?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So, Kate, I just want to say that, sources are nebulous by their nature, and it depends upon the researcher, the kind of questions that you're asking. So for example, a source may reiterate the, pleasure of what Seema was saying, of masculinity, of patriarchy, of the elite. But the same source, has been read by scholars against the grain, has been read in different ways to narrate a completely different story of pleasure. So what I'm saying is that a source, is raw in that sense. It is the way in which you read it, the way you interpret it. So it is, you may be seeing dominant sources, you may be seeing sources written by elite, which Jaya ma'am was also saying, but then what you make of that, does a voice of even patriarchal oppression or even pleasure provide you with a narrative which is of something else as well. So, for example, a pleasure of which is got from an elite pan. What does the courtesan is getting out of it? What is the courtesan perspective on pleasure, or even a perspective of being away from the household? What does that bring to her? So I think those are the kind of questions that a researcher asks.
Kira, just one thing that from what Charu ma'am was saying, for example, Mrichkatikam, within the Mrichkatikam is an entire household which is built around pleasure. One prakoshta is about something and so on and so forth. But within that, there is a category of male child, Bandhula, who says we are useless people. Now, everybody, where else male children are celebrated in Dharma Shastras, etc. But within the household of the courtesan, they say we are useless, we are parasites, we are the unwanted ones, we have no productive role to play in this particular household. Now, I find that a very fascinating way of subverting that entire notion of the patriarchal and a masculine household in the Ganika's household. So how are you reading this? How do you read a source? Is something which I think all, everybody's pointed out. And I think if you are, I don't know, you are in MPhil with us, I'm not sure. But this is something we try and bring to our research scholars also and our PG students how to read it. So anybody else, or shall we?
There's no comment or question in the chat box, so I think we can wrap up.
Please.
Okay, so I would, on behalf of the seminar committee of the Department of History, I would like to thank all the professors here, Professor Charu Gupta ma'am, Professor Nasreen, Professor Shalini Shah, Professor Seema Bawa ma'am, for all the beautiful insights and letting us know what's there in the book, and we'll surely read it now. And I would also like to inform about the next talk we will be having on 22nd of September by Professor Robert De Caroli. He will be speaking on remodeling, repair and renovation at Kanheri and the Buddhist caves of the Western Deccan. So we are looking forward to see you all again on 22nd. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.